Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
Welcome back to another episode of Superhuman Radio. Today is really going to be a good show, I promise you. Weight loss, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes are things that you are monitoring. You're going to love today's show. Before we get started, I have to mention that I got an email yesterday and someone asked, why do I cover my face when I'm doing the show? That's like a no-no. You're doing video. And my reply to that is, have you not seen my face? Don't you want me to cover this so you can focus on the content? Anyway, the CDC says that heart disease and cancer are the number 1 and number 2 killers of Americans. But that's a lie. Because the number 1 killer of Americans, and I would even go as far as saying other people in other countries in the developed world, is insulin resistance and the onset of type 2 diabetes, and then living with that type 2 diabetes, taking drugs that are supposed to minimize the damage. Minimize. Not stop the damage. Minimize. Do you do anything? Do you treat anything else that way in your house? Something damaging your house? Do you just go, oh, we'll just minimize it, but let it keep damaging it? No. So until we start being honest with our words and say, hey, type 2 diabetes is the number 1 killer of Americans, we can't address the problem. If we keep saying, well, it's heart disease, well, let's look for a genetic defect that causes heart disease. It's cancer. Let's look at the genetics for cancer. Wrong. We need to look at insulin resistance and what can help normalize the insulin response, because it's not just glucose. It's insulin itself that causes problems. We're going to get into that today when we talk about exogenous ketones and their potential role as a therapeutic with Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, a good friend of the show. Before we do that, I have to thank our title sponsor, and that's Legendary Foods. Legendary Foods makes something called the Tasty Pastry. It's amazing. It's a snack with less than 1 gram of sugar and 20 grams of high-quality protein. As the name implies, it's a pastry. It's filled with icing, and it's delicious. And you'll think you're eating something that you shouldn't be eating, but you're not. You'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary. Use the code SHR10 to save 10% off. And of course, we give away tasty pastries every day on the show. Listen during the commercial break. I will say a secret word. When you hear the secret word, email it to onair@superhumanradio.net. Include your a mailing address, and we will send you a box of tasty pastries. I mean, who does that? Nobody. So I feel like Oprah. So do that and get those, and you'll love them, I promise. And now I'll bring my guest on, my Italian brother from another mother, Dominic D'Agostino. How you doing, Dom?
I'm doing really well. How are you, Carl?
Good, good.
Thanks for having me on.
No, thank you for coming on, because in my humble opinion, you are the foremost leader. You are the bleeding edge. You are the tip of the spear when it comes to this kind of stuff. No one has done more and continues to do more to elucidate the role of the presence of ketones and their effect on health. And so I started reading some of this stuff, right? So let me tell my story. So I'm 63 years old right now, and I suspect I'm getting insulin resistant. For me, I'm still very lean, but I have a distended stomach. And when I look at distension in the gut, it cannot be attributed completely to inflammation in the gut. Like people like, well, it's inflammation in your intestines. No, it's starting up here and goes all the way down to my pelvic bone. And to me, if I were to go get a scan, I'd probably be told that I have some excess visceral fat. So I've started to think, I believe tissue. So this idea that we become insulin resistant and type 2 diabetic like a monolith, right, from head to toe, I don't agree with that. I think that different tissue becomes resistant to insulin at different rates at different times. And I think that there's something about the fat in the viscera, because I believe from research that I've read, like when you get liposuction, the body packs more fat into the viscera, right? It sees the viscera as a safe place for the fat. We may need this fat later. So all these dots tell me visceral fat somehow has a hierarchy. And when you become insulin resistant, the body wants to store that fat in the viscera where it can't be torn off or shed very easily. And so I thought, wow, when's the last time I had a flat stomach? It was just a few years ago. And it was because I was using ketones daily. I was fasting, training fasted in the morning with ketones, having my first meal after that, having 2 or 3 meals a day, but nice light meals. And my abs came out, my stomach got flat. And I thought, wow, what if ketones help change the insulin resistant landscape of tissue? And so I emailed you and you sent me studies, and I thought we have to talk about this on the air, because this could actually be the missing thing for some people, who just for some reason they can't get their insulin response to become normalized. So let's talk about this first. You sent me a study that showed rodents that were given, they had 30% of their calories replaced with ketones, I believe, but they were allowed to eat whatever they wanted, actually saw a change in the insulinogenic response, right?
Yeah, like a pretty profound reduction. And, I questioned a lot of these studies because you can always get a reduction in insulin when you decrease, when you produce a caloric deficit, right? In this case, there does not appear to be a caloric deficit. So ketones, working through a number of different mechanisms, enhances insulin sensitivity. The rodent data is very strong on this. When you give, and this has to be viewed in context, if you give a large dose of the ketones acutely, you have an elevation of insulin because that's a counter-regulatory response. But the long-term changes that you see over time with repeat administration is an improvement in insulin sensitivity and an overall lowering, even in a eucaloric state, a lowering of insulin overall. And in that particular case, it's about 30%. And we don't have human data yet, unless, we have a lot of anecdotal subjects who are consuming ketones who maintain low insulin. But the human data has yet to sort of surface. But if you go on clinicaltrials.gov and just type in ketone supplement, you get almost 100 clinical trials. So this has been an area of clinical research that has exploded, because a few years ago, there was like nothing, right? So there is an enormous amount of research going on right now that will sort of shed light on this and elucidate the mechanisms, and we can delve into where the mechanisms. But I do think that high insulin contributes to that intra-omental fat, and it could be, there's genetics and a lot of other factors that could contribute to that. But insulin is definitely a key factor in that intra-omental fat that you described.
Okay, so why does the initial what effects do ketones have on insulin and vice versa? Because obviously, if the presence of ketones seems to stimulate an insulin sensitizing effect, but the introduction of very high levels early on has to adjust down because it seems to stimulate an insulinogenic response. So aside from sensitizing tissue, what direct effects do ketones have on insulin and vice versa?
Well, I think it's good to approach this from like the perspective of when you start fasting, that suppresses insulin and insulin signaling to liberate fat mobilization from adipose tissue. And then that fat is used by pretty much all the cells and tissues of your body, except the central nervous system. So through enhanced beta oxidation of fatty acids in the liver, that chops up fatty acids into small water-soluble fat molecules, and they're called ketone bodies, right? So think of just ketones are byproducts of fat metabolism. And then those ketones can then give the brain energy. That's really the primary function of ketones. On a ketogenic diet, you have the same amount of calories. You can maintain body weight, be on a ketogenic diet, and insulin still falls. And it's that insulin suppression that actually drives fat oxidation in the liver to make ketone bodies. So in that context, insulin, the acute response to feeding obviously goes down. And then in some people, insulin does not change. In some people, a very small amount, you may have an elevation of insulin, but in the large majority of people, especially if you are type 2 diabetic or overweight, baseline insulin goes down pretty profoundly. So if you take a normal person and give them a ketone supplement and feed them ketones, like in the rat study, there's evidence that there's an enhancement of insulin signaling, and that could be due to a number of factors. We think that, the liver is really like I think of the liver as an energetic sensor. So when you consume ketones, there's a counter-regulatory response that the liver has, that if you consume ketones, a large bolus, it will actually decrease fat oxidation, but the level of ketones you need to have a delta, at least for me, of about 2 millimolar, which doesn't really occur with the ketone salt products on the market. If you take a large dose of an ester, it can have an anti-lipolytic effect. But I consumed ketones at different doses, and I can't get insulin. I can't get an acute increase in insulin really with a ketone salt product. With an ester, I can, but I have to boost it up to 5 millimolar. But an increase, just like glucose, right? Like larger increase is not better. Higher ketones is not better than lower ketones. So we really don't want to get under certain therapeutic applications, insulin shock, advanced epilepsy,
managing cancer, tumors and stuff like that. Yeah.
But when you produce hyperketonemia in that 3 to 4 to 5 millimolar range, that actually is a pretty high metabolic acidosis load that the body has to deal with. Whereas if you elevate ketones into that like 1 millimolar range, 1 to 2 in that range, that's when I feel the most benefits. And I think you'll see the most benefits, probably for some therapeutic applications, but for the large majority of people who want to enhance insulin sensitivity, get performance benefits, cognitive benefits, anti-inflammatory benefits. But if you're chronically giving large doses of ketones, and like a large dose of ester will spike you up, to 5 millimolar, but it'll come back down in like an hour or two. Whereas if you formulate the product correctly and you do beta hydroxybutyrate with a balanced mineral supplement, and also if you co-administer exogenous ketones with a ketogenic fat like medium chain triglycerides, that delays the gastric absorption and pushes the pharmacokinetic curve to the right, where you have a greater sustainment of hyperketonemia over time. And that can be beneficial. And that also seems to buffer any kind of insulin spike. But just lower levels of ketones in that 1 to 2 millimolar range typically has insulin, enhancing, insulin sensitizing effects, which means the body can secrete less insulin, and it does the same job with less insulin.
And there's two exciting things that you just said. I want to cover some nuances. The first is, it turns out that less is better, because when the ketone salts first came out, everybody was, there was a race to, well, this is 14 grams of ketones a scoop. Oh, this is 11. And people were literally going, well, I want the one with the most, but they were taking the whole scoop. So it turns out, it turns out that less is better because the stuff is expensive, number one. Number two, it turns out that the presence of exogenous ketones does When rule number 1 is adhered to, you're not taking too much. It turns out that the presence of exogenous ketones does help you lose body fat. See, remember when this all first came around, Dom, there was a lot of us saying, yeah, sure, if you're making your own ketones because you're fasted and you're in ketosis, yeah, you're going to lose body fat, but taking an external supplement isn't going to make you lose body fat because it's stalling your body from making its own ketone. Turns out that while that may be true, what really is happening is this extrinsic effect that we never bargained for, which was making the body more insulin sensitive. And insulin, we look so hard at glucose. Oh, glucose. But if you look at the research on neuropathy, for instance, diabetic neuropathy turns out is not because of glycation. It's not because of rising sugar. It's because of elevated or hyperinsulinemia. The insulin actually causes small blood vessels to constrict, which stops feeding the nerves, and ergo you end up with, you could call it hyperalgesia. I call it hyperalgesia because these people still feel things. They just feel 1,000% of it, or neuropathy. So it turns out that insulin is really friggin' important, but doctors only look at sugar.
Yeah, I think insulin is equally or more important, and it's unfortunate that standard blood work does not include an insulin measurement. It is the most important thing. Like, you can have 2 people that have the same blood glucose, say 85, and one that has 4 times the amount of insulin is being secreted to maintain that blood glucose at 85, and that's producing a whole host of pathological conditions in the body. You can even extend it, like pretty much every neurological disease too, and many certain types of cancers are pathophysiologically linked to insulin resistance. It's sort of the flame that's burning and producing a whole cascade of events that's pushing our body into a scenario where we're getting early onset chronic diseases like Alzheimer's disease, cancer, probably non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is probably one of the biggest, NAFLD. You can go on. And our metabolic health is really paramount when it comes to longevity, when it comes to just feeling good. And it does, to some extent. You can achieve this with simple calorie restriction, right? A calorie restricted, moderate carbohydrate diet. But the benefits of ketones is that you have lower insulin, GLP-1 is regulated, ghrelin goes down. If you administer ketones and you administer dextrose, you have proportionally much lower levels, on a calorie to calorie basis. Right. So that's really important to acknowledge, especially I think a lot of the benefits, when we mix in the ketones and feed it to animals, we always have favorable body composition alterations. And that was very interesting, but not what we were studying. It was more like a side effect of what we were studying. We were looking at, we're studying cancer, we're mostly studying seizure disorders and things like that. But I always kind of chalked it up to, when you add the ketones to the food, the animals are inadvertently eating less. So you're getting a calorie restriction effect. But if you adjust for that, the animals can be on a eucaloric diet, and there appears to be these benefits happen independent of calories. And actually, our last blog entitled, the benefits of ketones, really goes into all the different benefits, like ketones as an energy molecule, focus and cognition. Ketones have anti-catabolic effects. That's probably one of their primary evolutionary mechanisms, is reducing gluconeogenic amino acids from being released from skeletal muscle and preserving skeletal muscle. And actually, IV infusion of beta hydroxybutyrate promotes muscle protein synthesis in humans. So there was a study in humans.
Why infusion and why not? You can't get an oral dose high enough? Why infusion?
This study was done a long time. Well, let me pull it.
Dom, can you hear me? I think we may have lost him. Hey, Dom, if you can hear me, I think we lost you. Yeah, we did. He did something on his computer and he just froze there. So let's go ahead and take an early break. I have lots of questions and we won't lose track. And those of you who are posting questions. Oh, okay, good. Before we go on, I want to do
pulling up some websites. That's probably why.
Yeah, probably it compromised your bandwidth or something. The website to go to is ketonutrition.org, where you can find all the science and applications that we're talking about today. Okay, so let's get back to a couple questions here real quick. Don't ketones...
Well, real quick, I wanted to mention that study real quick. It's in Journal of Clinical Investigator, the effect of beta-hydroxybutyrate on whole body leucine kinetics and fractional mixed skeletal muscle protein synthesis in humans. And this was done in 1988, where we just had sodium beta-hydroxybutyrate. So that was administered and showed that it actually, beta-hydroxybutyrate increased skeletal muscle protein synthesis. So it would be nice to replicate that. I mean, there was no ketone supplements or anything at that time. They were just interested in the physiology back in 1988, which makes it a pretty credible source.
That's fascinating.
It wasn't funded by a supplement company or something.
As a former bodybuilder, and you had an amazing physique when you were bodybuilding. I mean, you look like somebody out of the movies. There's a lot of discussions about the ketogenic diet and bodybuilding. And there are people out there who say you can't build muscle on a ketogenic diet. So is that a function of ketones? Sounds like it's not. It may be a function of the fact that you just can't eat enough calories to be in such a calorie excess to build muscle because it's very satiating. Any opinions on that?
Yeah, if you equate for protein and have equal protein for a high carb diet versus a ketogenic diet, I think you can definitely build muscle, maintain it, and the end result is that you're going to be leaner while you're building the muscle. So I guess the question is it optimal? And I've discussed this with, Layne Norton on Joe Rogan podcast where we kind of go back and forth. My primary focus with the ketogenic diet is using it is engineering the ketogenic diet as a metabolic therapy for epilepsy. And then a whole range of emerging applications kind of came out of that research. So including actually as an anti-cachexia therapy in the context of cancer. Yeah, because ketones have pretty profound anti-catabolic effects. So in digging more into the literature, I was surprised to find, this study, the 1988 study, the effect of beta-hydroxybutyrate on skeletal muscle protein synthesis being increased. But my Ph.D. student, now postdoctoral fellow, Dr. Andrew Kutnick, he's at the Institute for Human and Machine Cognition now. His Ph.D. thesis was actually evaluating the effect of a ketone ester on body composition and skeletal muscle mass, and demonstrated that it does have anti-catabolic effects. So it can be, the preclinical work has been done, and mechanistically we're dissecting, how ketones are anti-catabolic. And it's not just one mechanism, it's a number of mechanisms likely working in synergy in that regard. So we do think, not only ketones are a favorable fuel for the brain and not a favorable fuel for most forms of cancer. The ketones and elevation and sustained hyperketonemia can allow a person with cancer to preserve their skeletal muscle, probably by knocking down certain inflammatory pathways, but decreasing the liberation and the breakdown of skeletal muscle, probably to liberate things like alanine and other gluconeogenic amino acids. It sort of mitigates or attenuates that. So it works in that way. And it doesn't appear to be a calorie, like you don't need surplus amount of calories to do it. Like you can have, even in the context of a mild calorie restriction, I think it's having an anti-catabolic effect.
Do ketones have, exogenous ketones have a caloric weight? Carbs are 4 calories. Do we have that make-believe number so that when you're applying these eucaloric diets and you're replacing fat with ketones or carbs with ketones, you can say, okay, here's what we need?
Yeah. I have not seen data to unambiguously sort of put a calorie content to the different ketones, exogenous ketones. There's pretty good data on 1,3-butanediol and other ketones. The monoester and the diester run about 5.6 to 6.2 calories per gram, which is somewhere between carbohydrates and protein and fat, like somewhere in the middle. So they're like that hybrid. They're like a hybrid fuel. And I do think about them, the late Dr. Veach, who really was kind of my inspiration for going down this path, and Dr. Henri Brunengraber, and he ran the NIH-funded metabolomics core at Case Western. They were the people who kind of put me on this path, and they both made two different types of ketone esters. And we evaluated different ones, and I chose the one that served my application the best and went down that path. So they did convince me that it was a super fuel, and it is, I think Dr. Veach maybe described it as a high octane fuel. And we know that certain machines, and I would argue, as a machine, starts to degrade the human body, it runs better on a high octane fuel. Like, I have two motorcycles, one's maybe a BMW has a compression ratio of 12-1, and the older bike is like a 9-1 compression ratio. That if I put bad fuel in the bike with a high compression ratio, it's going to knock. It's not going to run right, and the exhaust is not going to, you're going to get more if you're giving glucose as an analogy, you're going to get more bad exhaust in the form of superoxide anion, which comes from the mitochondria. Whereas when you're burning beta hydroxybutyrate or ketones, the delta G of ATP hydrolysis is quite higher, and you are getting more mechanical work out of the same amount of energy of carbon. And that's an important concept. And the hydraulic efficiency of the heart, it pumps more efficiently with ketones. And that's people, you go on a ketogenic diet, it's going to kill you of a heart attack. Well, ketones are the heart runs better on fat than it does on glucose. And come to find out, the heart runs probably best on ketones. It's just it's a fuel that gives a very high bioenergetic state to the cell.
All right, we have lots to talk about. We're also going to try to zero in on if people are taking a ketone ester versus a ketone salt or a quad salt or whatever, like what a goal amount and how many times a day. I'd like to give people something to start with, like a baseline, and then they can manipulate it themselves. We're talking today with Dr. Dominic D'Agostino. His website is Keto Nutrition, KETO nutrition.org. And we will answer all of your questions. We'll be right back with more. Stay tuned. You are watching and listening to Superhuman Radio. And feel free, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, post questions. We'll work them into the show. Be right back.
New Mass Pro Synthogen X2 just upped its own legendary game. To distance itself even further from the rest of the pack, Synthogen X2 now has double the key active ingredients. If you've ever wondered what steroid-like recovery feels like, Synthogen X2 delivers. See why others compare it favorably to powerful bodybuilding drugs at synthogen.com. Mass Pro Synthogen. When you train with it, you'll gain with it.
Ketones. Every day, there's a new wellness trend. Eat that, do this, avoid those. How do you know where to start or who to trust? Inside Tracker helps you cut through the noise by analyzing your blood, your DNA, your lifestyle, and your fitness tracker to provide you with a science-backed, trackable action plan on how to live, age, and perform better. Personalized, one-size-fits-one recommendations to help you optimize you. For a limited time, Inside Tracker is offering Superhuman Radio listeners 25% off the entire store. Go to shrnetwork.biz/Inside Tracker, INSIDETRACKER, to save 25% off. Change begins on the inside. Being superhuman means being conscientious about the choices we make. White Oak Pastures is superhuman when it comes to raising livestock. They're committed to animal welfare, land regeneration, and rural revival. They responsibly manage the entire process from the pasture to your doorstep. High quality, pasture raised, great tasting meat from a farm you can trust. Full nose to tail selections. They even have options for your pet. Go to shrnetwork.biz/white oak and use code SHR20 to save 20% off your entire first order. Is there something interfering with your happiness or ability to achieve your goals? BetterHelp can help. They will assess your needs and match you with a licensed therapist. This is not a self-help or crisis line. It's professional counseling done securely online. They have a broad range of experts and are available worldwide without having to wait in an uncomfortable waiting room. Get the help you need and start living a happier life today. Go to shrnetwork.biz/betterhelp. That's better, H-E-L-P, and receive 10% off your first month of counseling when you use the code SHR. Remember those rectangular toaster pastries you used to love when you were a kid? Well, Legendary Foods has just made them better. The new cake-style tasty pastry is like nothing you've ever had before. With 20 grams of high-quality protein and less than 1 gram of sugar, you'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off your purchase of tasty pastries. Now available in cookies and cream, red velvet cake, birthday cake, blueberry, strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, and hot fudge sundae. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use code SHR10 today. I need to share with you all a revolutionary new wearable technology called HapB. HapB allows you to enjoy the effects of caffeine, alcohol, nicotine, melatonin, and muscle relaxants without actually ingesting anything. Yes, really. They figured out the unique magnetic signature of each of these molecules and recorded them. Just put the HapB on, choose the signal you want, and it starts projecting the magnetic signature of that molecule that you choose, like coffee for feeling alert. Go to hapbee.com/SHR. That's HAPBEE.com/SHR to learn more and unlock an $80 discount exclusively for the Superhuman Radio listeners.
This is the Superhuman Channel, where we use oxygen for the power of good.
Hey, welcome back. Want to give the listeners and the viewers a shout out to check out HapBee, shrnetwork.biz/HapBee, HAPBEE. This device is amazing. People rave about the first time that they use it because you can feel it working. I think it's great to help you fall asleep at night. If you're somebody who has a hard time falling asleep, the HapBee is something you should check out. Again, shrnetwork.biz/HapBee, HAPBEE. And I think you don't need a code. Just use that link and you'll save $80 off your own HapBee. Okay, so let's get back to the topic at hand. So if I wanted to do something over, and I want to make sure I mention something. People hear stuff like this and they try it for a week and it doesn't, I don't notice anything. Nothing changes quickly. You didn't get fat quickly. It took me a decade to get to 330 pounds. I had to work at it every single day consistently. So the things we're going to talk about now, you have to understand that you have to be patient. You have to let this work over the course of months to see if it's actually helping you or not. So with that being said, if I wanted to use some of the different exogenous ketone products out there, there's salts, obviously, and then there's esters, and the esters, there's a couple different types. It sounds to me like I could get by with just a couple grams of, let's say, the salts a few times a day in order to help normalize insulin response. I think we lost Dom again. Either that or he's sleeping. We'll give him a minute to come back. He usually does come right back. Let's see here. In the meantime, let's plug his website. Again, if you want to learn more, go to ketonutrition.org, educate others about metabolic therapies and the ketogenic diet. That's where you go. Okay, he's back. I don't know what portion of that you heard. If I wanted to use ketone salt,
I heard all of it.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
I think it was just my bandwidth. I had too many. I have a million studies open and clinicaltrials.gov looking at all the studies, and there's an explosion of research on this. I do want to address the issue acute versus chronic. So the very first studies that we did, you may know that Patrick Arnold was synthesizing the ketone, one of the ketone esters for us, and I didn't really have enough to do administration over a week, which I was going to do prior to putting the animal into a hyperbaric environment to simulate like a Navy SEAL dive, right? So we just administered it once, and it had a remarkable, after we finished the study, a single administration of a ketone ester So this particular ester has a very strong anti-seizure nerve protective effect. One dose, 30 minutes prior to inducing a seizure, delayed the seizure latency by 600%. So
Wow.
we published that, and that really changed my whole, because I was really of the opinion that the brain had to go through this keto adaptation. And actually, it was Dr. Veach that said, no, your brain is already wired. You have the transporters there. You have ketolytic enzymes in the brain. You're already wired to use ketones. So it really depends on context. In regard to body composition alterations, you need to administer it really for humans probably after about 2 or 3 weeks. You start to see changes, measurable changes in, metabolic biomarkers like insulin and high sensitivity C-reactive protein and hemoglobin A1C, things like that. And I believe in the beginning,
Dom, you dropped out right at when you said in the beginning, and then you dropped out for a second.
Yeah, in the beginning, I thought a lot of the positive effects of ketones were due to calorie restriction, but there appears to be a lot of benefits independent of calorie restriction that appear to be, directly related to the ketone bodies. And I think that's an important concept. And we know acutely when you give ketones, probably the most remarkable thing you see if you're a physiologist is a sharp decrease in blood glucose. And we don't really understand what's going on. In the beginning, I just figured, I knew when you go on a ketogenic diet, one way that your body regulates ketones is that as ketone levels get elevated in the blood, that will cause the pancreas to secrete a tiny amount of insulin, which will turn down, regulate ketogenesis in the liver. And it was like a very fine-tuned, counter-regulatory mechanism. So I was just figuring, a large dose of ketones would increase insulin, and then the insulin was giving us these really hypoglycemic effects. In rats and mice, their glucose runs like 150 to sometimes like 160, 170. That's normal for them.
Right.
And we would get glucose down into like 40. We'd figure it was universally fatal. Yeah, they'd be completely fine. So it was completely dose dependent. So I'm of the opinion now that it was not an insulin response, but it's a decrease in gluconeogenesis. It's a counter-regulatory effect that the ketones are influencing the liver to decrease gluconeogenesis, maybe a small increase in insulin, but enhancing insulin sensitivity, decreasing gluconeogenesis, and decreasing glycogenolysis. These are 3 things that kind of work together to give us this profound decrease in blood glucose. And I think that has huge implications for type 2 diabetes, for metabolic health. You have pretty good evidence showing that insulin is working better. The same amount, insulin's not changing much, but you're getting a profound decrease in glucose, which seems to be indicative of enhancing glucose disposal. So ketones.
I was just going to ask you that. I was going to say, look, we know that if we eat this and it ends up in our stomach, we know that. But what the body does with it after that. So maybe some of the blood sugar maybe some of the glucose isn't making it into the blood sugar, but it's being like detoured and sent out of the body.
Yeah, this is very interesting because there's only a couple, like where does the glucose go? So that's a big question. When you drink alcohol also has a hypoglycemic effect. You could have, I'm going to post something on Instagram later today, which shows me eating a mango, definitely not ketogenic, a large mango from my tree at home spikes me up to like 170. If I have a glass of dry farm wine with very little sugar and then eat the mango, it's almost completely flat. So we're doing studies with Levels Health, which is a continuous glucose monitor system, and the Levels Health is an app, and it gives you insight into what's going on. There's a lot of people associated with that company that are wearing CGM reporting that they could eat a large carbohydrate meal with wine or alcohol, and it's completely blocking that response.
Mitigated, yeah.
So
yeah.
in the context of alcohol, what I think is going on is that it's stimulating de novo lipogenesis of the glucose. So, you're asking, where does the glucose go? I don't think it's storing it. I think it's in the context of ketones, which appear to be doing something very similar. I would say that it's enhancing glucose disposal, decreasing gluconeogenesis. I think there's good evidence for that, and probably decreasing glycogenolysis. It's like, when the body is sensing that there's ketones, I think it's evolutionarily, there's mechanisms that we're in a fasted state. There's limited food availability. So we're not going to want to catabolize our gluconeogenic amino acids in skeletal muscle, and we're not going to want to liberate glycogen from the liver. We're going to want to conserve that. So I think, but we'll probably want to burn more fat. So I think there's maybe an increase in fatty acid oxidation, maybe in the muscle. And because we have maybe 2,000 calories stored as glycogen in the liver, but even a lean person has 20,000 calories of, fat. So I think there's a metabolic shift. And I do think that consuming exogenous ketones helps to sort of like coach the body and open up pathways associated with enhanced fat and ketone oxidation. So it helps transition the body into a fat burning state. It sounds like a marketing kind of thing.
I know. I was going to say, it sounds like a commercial, right?
But if you just, if you're in our lab and you just see the results, the animals, I mean, we can put them on a zero carbohydrate diet and with exogenous ketones, and they actually thrive in that context. And we've done a lot of animal research, and now we're transitioning more towards to human studies. So it's going to be very interesting to see how these theories pan out. Rodent physiology is pretty similar.
How long does BHB stick around? So if I were to take 2 grams of a mineral-bound BHB product, first of all, would that be an adequate amount to see some of the insulin sensitivity normalizing effects? And how long would that last before I have to take another 2 grams?
Well, it depends. So the advantage of actually combining ketones with an electrolyte, you are delivering an electrolyte, which is kind of beneficial, usually in the context of a low-carb diets, because you're low insulin, you're dumping out a lot more sodium. So you need to, bring in more sodium and electrolytes. So electrolytes actually delay gastric absorption. So if you eat a high sodium meal with high fat, then you get a big delay because your body has to, it needs to be isotonic by the time it goes, into the duodenum and so there's a delay there. So it really depends. If you have an empty stomach, sodium beta hydroxybutyrate may spike up and be back down the baseline in about an hour and a half. If you mix it with, if you have a balanced mineral salt, sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, then that's going to be elevated longer. More electrolytes.
Each of those has a different pathway of the body bringing it in other words, right?
Sure. Yeah. There's different transporters for each of the electrolytes, and the body, the GI system does like to kind of maintain that like this isotonic state. And so there's actually a big benefit to one benefit, not only giving electrolytes, is that there's a delay in gastric absorption. And you could further enhance that by delivering it with like a ketogenic fat, like MCT.
Like MCT oil. I'm going to start using it with MCT oil. That's what I'll do.
Yeah. And you can use the powder or the liquid. There's a lot of discussion too about, there's different ketone salt products out there, and you really want to look at the people behind the company, the transparency of the product, what's on the label. There are products out there that are, you want to look for a product that's potent, tolerable, and palatable. Like some things just don't taste good, like the ketone esters, they're kind of novelty. Like you buy them and you taste them, and I have them, sitting on the shelves, but I won't reach for them because I have to choke them down.
They taste like industrial solvents. They taste like paint thinner. Like when I was out at Quest back in the day, they had a big gallon jug of ketone esters, and I would drink that stuff down, and I felt like I just drank kerosene or something like that. It's just horrible. Horrible.
Well, they're potent, so you could put them potentially in capsules, and it's very context dependent. So they're definitely, without a doubt, really good therapeutic applications for these things, and probably operational applications from a military standpoint. Things like oxygen toxicity seizures, which I study, but traumatic brain injury and things like that. So they are a potent go-to, but the ketone salts have the benefit of delivering, like sodium, magnesium beta hydroxybutyrate is very bioavailable. But then there's a discussion about the racemic versus the D enantiomer.
Right.
So there's a lot of discussion and a lot of hype behind the natural version, but not a whole lot of studies, right, that compare the two together. And we have done quite a bit of research on the racemic compound, and I have not seen. I am the first person that would change and go all towards studying one enantiomer, but our observations show that the racemic compounds tend to be very therapeutic or more therapeutic. I mean, the very first compound, I'm not going to name it, but the very first compound that I studied was an enantiomer that was, a D enantiomer, and it didn't have an anti-seizure effect. And then we went to a racemic compound, and it did it was a different type of ester.
Now, when you say racemic compound, you mean it has both the D and L, right?
D and L.
I had a guy on the show last year who was hawking ketone esters, the Veach ester, and he just poo-pooed on the racemic. And my thought was, well, wait a minute, if I take these salts and they're the racemic, and then I prick my finger and I see I'm at 2.2 millimole. Who cares? I got where I want to be. Like, who cares if it's not as efficient as another one?
Well, a couple points. It may be more efficient. So when you measure your ketones, it's only measuring D beta hydroxybutyrate. So the assay only measures that. So it's not actually even measuring. So your ketones are twice as high. Actually, it may be more than twice high. And another really important thing to consider is that D beta hydroxybutyrate is probably a better energy source. I have not seen a head-to-head comparison of this, but there's not really good data on it. But this is something that we want to study in the lab. But the L beta hydroxybutyrate, they say non-natural enantiomer, but actually we do have a racemase enzyme, so we do make small amounts of it, but it gets oxidized very slowly. So the benefit of having the L is that it stays elevated longer in the system and then gets metabolized slowly. And the L, although it may not have the same energetic potency, it has similar signaling effects. So the benefit is that if you do the DL, the racemic, you are giving an energetic molecule, and you're giving the L beta hydroxybutyrate, which it stays elevated in the blood longer and can impart and confer some really interesting signaling, like the NLRP3 inflammasome, for example, is suppressed by the D and the L, but the D will get burned up as energy really quickly. But the lower oxidation rate of the L beta hydroxybutyrate would actually confer more of an anti-inflammatory response, and probably other signaling, probably epigenetic signaling. So we're looking at ketone metabolites as epigenetic regulators. And it's conceivable and likely that the L beta hydroxybutyrate may be a more powerful epigenetic regulator, just simply due to the fact it's oxidized slower, stays elevated in the blood longer, and probably elevated in the tissues longer, where it's actually having positive epigenetic effects. So this is something that we're kind of studying right now. And so I think there's benefits. I'm not ready to go to if I'm going to choose a ketone product right now, there's more data on the racemic, I think, for at least in our lab, from all the benefits. And I'm kind of agnostic. I could, I'm just studying what works, and there's more data on the racemic.
So if I wanted to use a ketone, mineral-based ketone product, and I wanted to take 2 grams at a time, I should take that 2 grams with perhaps MCT oil to slow down gastric emptying. It's already racemic, so I'm probably going to have this prolonged tail from the L isomer. But do I take it with the meal, before a meal, after a meal, in between meals? How do you see it being best used if someone wants to achieve a normal, healthy insulin response?
Yeah, I would consume it with a meal or before a meal. So it would actually decrease, and you can do this experiment and tell people at home to do this experiment. I've done it many times. If you consume the ketone salt product and you eat carbohydrates, and if you eat carbohydrates or any meal without the ketone product, and then again, do it in the presence of ketones, which means you consume the product either before or during the meal, it's going to greatly attenuate your glycemic response, which will likely attenuate, which it will. I've done the experiment on myself. I've done a lot. I do insulin measurements at home. It will attenuate that insulin response. So if you are trying to enhance insulin sensitivity, reverse insulin resistance, I would most favorably consume the exogenous ketones immediately before or with the meal.
Interesting. Okay. Oh yeah. I mean, I'm going to start using it that way. We have to take our last commercial break, and when we come back, we have questions from the audience. So let's do this. Let's take I'm sorry. Go. You were going to say something?
Well, I was going to say 2 grams is probably not enough. And I mention that because there are a lot of companies out there that are promoting products and they're fairy dusting, these products. There are capsules of ketones and there's formulations with only, 300 milligrams. I saw one the other day. I think it's like the Shark Tank version of it or whatever. But you really need to deliver upwards of, 8 to 10 grams to get robust measurable effects. So that's really not a whole lot. I mean, that moves the needle into the direction that you want, but 2 grams may have epigenetic, it may have some signaling effects, but when it comes to effects that you can feel and acutely see, like a metabolic response, where you're looking at like hormones and glycemic response and insulin sensitivity, I think 2 grams would probably not be enough. Definitely not be enough. I would want to choose a product that would have like 10 grams.
Okay. Well, there you go. And when we come back, let's just touch on the esters, because I've heard that the esters recycle. I've heard all this different stuff about the esters and why they're better. But they're obviously so expensive, so expensive. Let's just touch on that, and then we'll answer some audience questions. Okay. Mm-hmm. Sit tight. We'll be right back. If there is one mineral you should be worried about not getting enough of, it's magnesium. Magnesium is the body's master mineral, powering over 300 critical reactions, including detoxification, fat metabolism, energy, and even digestion is influenced by the presence of magnesium. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about a new magnesium product I've been taking now called Magnesium Breakthrough. It's the ultimate magnesium supplement, easily the best I've ever seen or experienced. With all 7 forms of magnesium, I was able to arrange an amazing deal for my audience, and I guarantee it's the best deal available on this product. Seriously, with volume discounts combined with our custom 10% coupon code SHR10, you can save up to 40% off select packages of Magnesium Breakthrough. And I promise that this deal is only available on this specific website, magbreakthrough.com/SHR. You won't find that deal on Amazon or even on the company's own website. Go to magbreakthrough.com/SHR and use code SHR10 to save up to 40% off select packages of Magnesium Breakthrough. Attention meat lovers. I've discovered a snack with just 2 ingredients, meat and salt. That is so tender and delicious, you almost can't believe it. That's right. No soy, sugar, or other crap. Our partner, Carnivore Snacks, nailed it with these mouth-watering snacks. They have a variety too. Ribeye, pork loin, leg of lamb, and more, all sourced here in the USA from regenerative farms. Claim your superhuman offer from Carnivore Snacks today at shrnetwork.biz/snacks. That's SNAX. Use the code superhuman for 15% off your first order, plus a free 2-ounce pork loin.
New Mass Pro Synthogen X2 just upped its own legendary game. To distance itself even further from the rest of the pack, Synthogen X2 now has double the key active ingredients. If you've ever wondered what steroid-like recovery feels like, Synthogen X2 delivers. See why others compare it favorably to powerful bodybuilding drugs at synthogen.com. Mass Pro Synthogen. When you train with it, you'll gain with it.
Ketones. Every day, there's a new wellness trend. Eat that, do this, avoid those. How do you know where to start or who to trust? Inside Tracker helps you cut through the noise by analyzing your blood, your DNA, your lifestyle, and your fitness tracker to provide you with a science-backed, trackable action plan on how to live, age, and perform better. Personalized, one-size-fits-one recommendations to help you optimize you. For a limited time, Inside Tracker is offering Superhuman Radio listeners 25% off the entire store. Go to shrnetwork.biz/inside tracker, INSIDETRACKER, to save 25% off. Change begins on the inside. I need to share with you all a revolutionary new wearable technology called HapBee. HapBee allows you to enjoy the effects of caffeine, alcohol, nicotine, melatonin, and muscle relaxants without actually ingesting anything. Yes, really. They figured out the unique magnetic signature of each of these molecules and recorded them. Just put the HapBee on, choose the signal you want, and it starts projecting the magnetic signature of that molecule that you choose, like coffee for feeling alert. Go to hapbee.com/SHR. That's HAPBEE.com/SHR to learn more and unlock an $80 discount exclusively for the Superhuman Radio listeners. Remember those rectangular toaster pastries you used to love when you were a kid? Well, Legendary Foods has just made them better. The new cake-style tasty pastry is like nothing you've ever had before. With 20 grams of high-quality protein and less than 1 gram of sugar, you'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off your purchase of tasty pastries. Now available in cookies and cream, red velvet cake, birthday cake, blueberry, strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, and hot fudge sundae. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use code SHR10 today.
This is the Superhuman Channel, where brawn and brains finally meet.
Hey, welcome back. We got some questions we'll get to in a minute. We'll get all your questions answered, I promise. Before we do that, I want to talk about the ester for a second. Is it worthwhile if your goal is to body recomposition, insulin sensitivity normalization, to even look at the esters? They're so expensive, but then do you take less? Eyedroppers full? I mean, what do you think?
Well, I'll tell you what I do. I have access to pretty much anything, and cost is really not that much of an issue. So I like using the ketone salts. It delivers an electrolyte, and I think that's a very favorable thing. I tend to mix it with creatine, and I do that twice a day when I wake up, first thing when I wake up, and also midday, especially before training. So the potency is high enough to definitely stimulate hyperketonemia, where at a level where I wouldn't want to go any higher. So I'll kind of leave it at that. So the ketone esters, we've actually probably done equal or as much, probably more research with ketone esters. So that's coming from someone who has done most of their published research with ketone esters. And I do feel if I was a Navy SEAL going into an operation where I had to dive deep, using a closed circuit rebreather, or if I had brain injury, or in the context of various neurological diseases, I think the ketone esters have an advantage because you can get ketones higher. The diester of acetoacetate elevates acetoacetate, which tends to have a stronger anti-seizure effect than beta-hydroxybutyrate, especially when you elevate it in a 1-to-1 ratio of beta-hydroxybutyrate to acetoacetate. We've established that. But for the everyday person just looking to get an edge, to boost their energy, maybe reduce inflammation, enhance cognitive function, focus, those sorts of things, a ketone salt will definitely get you, elevated enough. And administering a ketone salt with an MCT stimulates endogenous ketone production at the same time, and I think will keep your ketones elevated for hours. So that's really the most favorable way. Like this morning I woke up, I put a product in my coffee called Keto Brains. It has MCT in it. It has, lion's mane, alpha GPC, and I'll mix up about 10 grams of ketone salts, and I'll drink that and then sip on my coffee, and I'll work. And if a day I'm intermittent fasting, and maybe you call it a modified intermittent fast, man, I'm on fire for the next 6 to 8 hours. I get a lot of work done. So that's kind of how I use it. And I think ketone salts are more versatile. The ketone esters have to be in a liquid form. They taste bad. They're expensive. And also there's a question about 1,3-butanediol. most of the ketone esters are made with that, and it goes through the same metabolism as alcohol, and the liver has to work to break that down to make that into ketones. So also high levels of 1,3-butanediol have a mild narcotic effect. It kind of makes you feel a little bit high, a little bit good, because some people like that effect depending on the dose. But it's like another variable where it's a more natural state. Ketone, beta hydroxybutyrate is a natural metabolite, and you have it bound to a natural mineral, and you're consuming it. So the body really doesn't know a difference. It doesn't really have to work to metabolize it. Whereas a ketone ester has to do some work to convert that 1,3-butanediol into, beta hydroxybutyrate. And there's a redox shift in the liver when that happens. Repeat administration over time, maybe it leads to a little bit of liver stress. If a high dose, maybe, 1 or 2 drinks a day, it's about that level of liver stress.
All right, let's
just
go
some
to
thoughts to consider.
Yeah, and you know what? I like the idea that it has minerals. Personally,
yeah,
I like
the salt. Yeah, the salt was a huge criticism, but I think just look at physiology. I mean, you're delivering salt, and you can have a balanced mineral. It doesn't have to be all sodium. Even if it is all sodium, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, sodium has many benefits and is typically, and you get rapidly depleted in sodium on low carb diets. Some people do.
I think Dr. Nicolantonio kind of put a light on this understanding about sodium in the diet, and this idea that less is great, and he's proving that more is great. If you look, kidneys.
If they're sodium sensitive, it might be a different issue. Yeah,
right. The kidneys actually work less when you have an abundance of minerals coming in, because then they don't have to barricade and keep them in the body. They go, oh, we get magnesium, potassium, sodium, we get all this stuff constantly. Let the floodgates, we could pee it out. We don't have to worry about it, because the kidneys are working the hardest when they're trying to sequester, not when they're just letting everything come out.
Mm-hmm. And also amino acids and many other nutrients are co-delivered with sodium. So transporters or co-transporters with sodium. So sodium really enhances the absorption of many different things in our food. So that's an important concept too.
Very interesting. So Dean Paulson says a lot of ketogenic diet studies show lowered testosterone levels. After keto diet, has he come in contact with this? Have you seen this testosterone lowering effect from ketogenic diet? And do you think the ketogenic diet maximizes body composition?
Yeah. So the first study, I think it was with elite gymnasts, showed favorable body composition alterations with a ketogenic diet, a low carbon ketogenic diet. And then another study that we published really showed an increase in testosterone with a ketogenic diet, as long as it's not calorie restricted. So the fastest way to lower your testosterone is to
starve,
have a caloric deficit. Yeah, like fasting. I just did blood work on a 3-day fast, and my testosterone went from like 600-700 to like 200. And so I'm actually going to do a modified fast, maybe with ketone supplements or the Keto Brains product, and just see if I can mitigate that a little bit. So it bounces right back. But I haven't really seen any good studies to show that a ketogenic, and I've seen a lot of blood work from the epilepsy world too.
Well,
we don't see any hormone changes like that.
High-fat diets have been shown to raise testosterone. So I think what you point out is critical. A high-fat diet where you're not eating less calories than you need a day sends a signal to the body that everything is great. But when you are starving, whether you're in a ketogenic diet, a vegetarian diet, I don't care if you're in a carnivore diet. If you're in a carnivore diet and you need 3,000 calories a day and you're only eating 1,500, testosterone is going to drop. Why? Because from an evolutionary perspective, you can't have children right now. You can't even feed yourself. Your body goes, we shut off the baby-making machinery. We see the same thing in elite female bodybuilders. They stop having a period when they go into that cut diet for 16, 20 weeks. They don't have a period. Why? They're starving. The body goes, she can't feed herself. How can she feed a baby?
Yeah, if I bump up my training too from like 1 or 2 days a week to like 3 or 4 days a week, and then keep everything the same and check my testosterone, it goes down. So I've seen this over and over again. I mean, not, to hypogonadal levels, but I do see a trend going down. But I also know that, the more I train, the higher receptor sensitivity I have to that testosterone too. So I think that's an important concept. When you train, your muscle is much more sensitive to testosterone. So you probably have more androgen receptors.
All right. So the next question comes from Neem McAvoy. He says, I have ketone
activity are inversely correlated with testosterone.
I'm sorry. You had dropped and I started talking. I apologize. That was my fault.
The high, over exercising, high levels of exercise are inversely correlated with testosterone. And that's probably independent of a calorie deficit too.
Yeah.
So just
you're overtraining. Once again, your body's going, for some reason, you can't accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. You don't need children. Neem McAvoy says, I have ketone esters. How is it best used to help balance insulin without doing a full keto diet as well? Or are they only effective if eating a keto diet? And also, does it help inflammation? And I kind of think you kind of answered these questions, but let's put it together for one listener.
Yeah, if she has ketone esters, administering that ketone ester with the meal, in particular carbohydrate meal, will decrease the glycemic response. And that will, after prolonged administration of, if she's on a carbohydrate-based diet, administering the ketone esters at the same time, or ketone supplement, is going to improve glycemic variability, and that's going to translate into better insulin sensitivity for a number of different reasons that we don't fully know, but we know that, that happens.
So Sean Baker has popularized the carnivore diet. And he was actually on my show in 2014 when his website was called N equals Many, where he was trying to get people to eat carnivore and get blood work done. And he's really popularized it. I will say this: as elimination diets go, it's a great elimination diet if you're trying to isolate why you have certain disorders that have a metabolic tendency. So, but my friend Joel Green keeps telling me that if you eat nothing but meat all the time, you could actually become insulin resistant. And I don't know, if there's any truth to that or what. So weigh in on the carnivore diet. What do you think of it?
I'm of the opinion that we are omnivores, and there are some days where I'm pretty busy and I have maybe 1 or 2 days in a row I'll do a complete carnivore diet. Right. So but it's not something that I'd want to do every day, day in and day out, because I think there are benefits to eating plants, to salads, to vegetables for our microbiome and for digestion. I think if you consume like 100 grams of protein, but you consume that protein, which you're doing on carnivore diet, and I think I've seen some of the meals that Sean Baker's eating, maybe 200-300 grams of protein he's eating in a meal.
Oh, more than that.
If you consume that meal,
6 pounds of steak. He eats 6 pounds of steak in one sitting.
Yeah. Well, I think he'd have, better digestion and assimilation if he had some fiber with that. I don't think fiber is absolutely necessary, but I think there are benefits to having fiber on gut microbiome diversity. So we want diversity in our microbiome, like the Amazon rainforest. We want a lot of different species, right? We don't want like a monocrop culture, like corn. So the ketogenic diet has been linked. Some ketogenic diets have been linked to a decrease in the diversity of the gut microbiome. And I think that's due to just not having a diversity of fiber. So the diversity of your gut microbiome will be proportional to the diversity of fiber that you're feeding it, and also different foods that you're eating. And so I think there's some importance there. And I think you have better protein digestion if you maintain, have fiber in your diet. And I think there's phytonutrients that have antioxidant effects that actually complementary. Some plant things can definitely impair the intestinal barrier function. You can go into all the different anti-nutrient things with wheat and grains and things like that, mostly associated with that. But I think generally speaking, the right types of plants can have a favorable effect on gut health and the microbiome and protein digestion.
I agree. So Craig Hollander is asking, how specifically can ketosis lower gluconeogenesis? Are you running out of time?
No, I was just looking at, I was wondering how specifically can lower gluconeogenesis?
Yeah, how specifically does ketosis lower gluconeogenesis? What does
okay. Ketones. So beta hydroxybutyrate, we think we observe, and multiple labs, with multiple types, even MCTs do this. When you administer a large dose of a ketogenic agent, you have a correspondingly dose-dependent reduction in glucose. And I think there are a number of reasons for that. Originally, I thought it was like, okay, well, the ketones are causing a release of insulin, which is facilitating glucose disposal. But then you see it even in the absence of an elevation of insulin. So what's likely happening is that you're triggering a counter-regulatory mechanism, and you're decreasing gluconeogenesis by impacting the energetic state of the liver. So if the liver is receiving energy, the liver is an energetic sensor. It's going to say, okay, let's reduce the amount of glucose we're dumping into the bloodstream. Let's also reduce the amount of glycogen that's being broken down. I know the GPR109A receptor decreases sort of sympathetic tone and glycogenolysis, I think, in the liver too. So I think we know that there's ketone receptors now. GPR109A, GPR41 and 43, I think. And these may have some influence. So the science is really new on that. So it's a kind of a convoluted answer, but I think the real answer is that we don't fully know, but I think we can venture to say that when the liver sees a bolus of ketones, that is a form of energy. And the liver is a powerful energetic sensor, and it's going to reduce the amount of energy that is dumping into circulation because it senses that we have energy. But it's just a unique form of energy that usually only happens, in a fasted state, ketogenic diet state. So I think and it is sort of a new kind of state because there's not a whole lot of ketones in natural food that we eat. So it's a molecule that our body makes, and it's bioidentical, and it's kind of natural in that regard. But it's like creatine, right? I mean, some people may criticize it because but when we're taking creatine, which has a very good safety track record and an amazing, ergogenic benefits, it's kind of, I think of ketones as the next creatine. Creatine came out. I remember putting it as an ergogenic aid on one of my tests in exercise physiology, and they marked it wrong. And I tried to argue with the professor. This is back in the early to mid 90s. So I want to go back to that professor now and argue to get the points back on the test. But I see ketones are the same thing. It took about 10 years to gain acceptance, but ketones are more of a versatile fuel, whereas creatine is just for short bursts of energy, where ketones have a wide variety of not only energetic effects, but signaling effects.
We have 3 more questions. Last one is from Andy Scarborough in the UK. So we'll get to him just shortly. Andy Cruikshank says,
oh, I know.
You know Andy?
I know Andrew Scarborough.
Oh yeah. He's
Andy. Yeah.
He's our last question here.
Yeah. Great guy.
Andy Cruikshank says, I have an issue with elevated fasting glucose. Postprandial, I'm fine. It returns to baseline fairly quickly. Could exogenous ketones make this situation worse by reducing insulin response and elevating blood glucose even further?
So he has elevated fasting glucose. So this is interesting. I actually, if I start a 3-day fast after about 24 hours, my glucose starts trending. It can go up to about 100 milligrams per deciliter and then comes back down. It did that, especially in the early states of fasting. So when you start fasting, a number of things happen, including the physiological effects of an activated sympathetic nervous system. So you have a release of catecholamines, which some people feel energetic, and you also have higher levels of cortisol, which I've measured. And because you have higher cortisol and higher catecholamines, the cortisol is making more glucose, and then the catecholamines are contributing to glycogenolysis. But after about 24 to 48 hours, you've burnt through 48 hours, you've burnt through your liver glycogen. So, yeah, I would not be concerned about that. That's just like your body's physiological response, but some people have more of that. I noticed that athletes have that more. So maybe the guy is probably a pretty athletic guy and fit guy. I noticed that, that's the physiological response seen in athletes more. But if you're in a state of ketosis, and you're not putting in fuel, and you don't want to end your fast with a high carbohydrate meal. You want to end your fast with a meal that does not produce wild fluctuations in glucose. Otherwise it's going to trigger a whole craving response. The postprandial dip in glucose that accompanies a carbohydrate meal, those postprandial dips are associated with increased desire for food and cravings. So maintaining glycemic variability between like 70 and 110 or 120, if you want to push it for the average, maybe 130, if you can do that, that's going to pay big dividends when it comes to not only good energy flow, but increasing or decreasing your appetite and maintaining proper appetite and not letting your appetite control you by these postprandial dips. So I would say it just really comes down to carbohydrate tolerance.
But I would add to his question and answering his question. So he's worried that the lowered insulin response caused by ketones or exogenous ketones would actually hurt his postprandial response, that he has a favorable postprandial response. But what you're missing here, Andy, is insulin sensitizing effects of ketones. It's not that they're competing with insulin.
Yeah.
So you're going to have this extra push that's going to push you down really, really hard after your meal. Chances are your postprandial response will be the same, but your fasting blood sugar levels may actually start to come down, because fasting blood sugar is a direct effect of insulin sensitivity. You're not eating. Your body is it's releasing glucose and glycogen from the liver. It's making a little glucose here and there, and you're just floating along. Well, if your insulin sensitivity is really good, that number is going to be less than 100. Maybe it'll be 70, maybe it'll 60. So I don't think that he has to worry. I think he could use a ketone supplement.
Yeah, less insulin will do a better job. You'll have more glucose disposal for a proportional amount of insulin. I mean, you can put it in that way, and that really occurs with a calorie deficit. Whenever you're running a calorie deficit, which is going to occur with fasting, it's going to increase insulin sensitivity, and and some people may over secrete insulin and could go into a hypoglycemic effect, but most people adapt very well. And they, I for a couple of years, I was just running. When I would do my insulin test, it was like 2 or 2.5. It was right on that edge of being like almost pathologically low, after doing it. But when I started the ketogenic diet, I had a normal or high insulin a long time ago when I first did my first insulin test. And, as I'm getting older, people typically trend this for higher insulin, but mine has been low or stayed low over time. And I attribute that to being in ketosis.
Last two questions. Tommy D says, in Joel Green's recent book, he mentions using ketone salts before bed to help with sleep. Any thoughts on that?
Anecdotally, yeah, I do. I would use a caffeine-free product. A lot of the products out there have caffeine, but yeah, I think I get a lot of emails about people, telling me that being in a state of ketosis helps with sleep. And I think, if we have good fuel flow to the brain while we're sleeping.
Dom, every now and again, we lose his audio. Let's see. He should be coming back here any second now. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Dom?
Yeah.
Okay, there you are. The last thing I think you said was if you're having some difficulties. I guess so. Let me circle this back
Ketones
around.
can be beneficial. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just
A
stated
lot of
simply,
people,
ketones can be beneficial.
a lot of people wake up in the middle of the night because they have a drop in blood sugar, and the body responds to that by waking them up. I find that taking 3 to 5 grams of glycine before bed, which is a highly gluconeogenic amino acid, kind of just gives you a little topping off of glucose throughout the night, keeps me asleep. When I use ketones before bed, and I look at my sleep, I have a much more active sleep. I'm moving more, and I actually wake up in the morning feeling like I didn't sleep completely. I feel like I'm on the edge of sleep. Now that could be because my brain is becoming impaired, and all of a sudden it sees all this ketone energy and goes, "Hey, let's have a party. We don't want to go to sleep right now," you know. But clearly, some people do have glucose management problems that wake them up at night, and I would imagine an exogenous ketone would be something to experiment with for sure.
Yeah,
Andy's,
hypoglycemia produces an energetic crisis, and that'll wake you up quick and activate your sympathetic nervous system. You want to avoid that.
and for what it's worth, there is a strong correlation between having way too much iron in your body and hyperinsulinemia. Hyperinsulinemia being your body just responds with a lot more insulin than it needs. And what this does is you have a meal, glucose rises, insulin comes in, instead of just what it needs, crushes glucose. And you have this dip where you become literally hypoglycemic an hour after the meal and you're starving. And if you are someone who's in your 60s like me and you've accumulated, donating blood once every 2 months could change the outcome completely, because you will find this idiopathic hyperinsulinemia subsides. Why does iron do this? I don't know. Maybe because it's highly oxidative. I don't know what it is. But the more iron you have in the body, the more insulin your body will produce in response to a carbohydrate meal. I've found.
Well, I would like to dig into the literature on that because I'm very interested in iron. Iron drives the Fenton reaction. And so iron in the context of some situations that are high in oxidative stress can fuel the transition of superoxide to hydrogen peroxide, but to a hydroxyl radical, and can create a very oxidative environment through different, through changing redox chemistry. So iron's can be very pro-oxidant. Low iron is very bad. High iron is very bad. So you want a good amount of iron. I'm glad you brought up giving blood. I think that's important for males, in particular postmenopausal women, to give blood and keep their iron on the low end of normal. I think can pay big dividends for brain health over time. So I'm glad you brought that up because I think it's an important concept. And so I put in my calendar, to give blood routinely as much as possible.
Yeah. Last question from Andy Scarborough in the UK. He says, I did an interesting experiment recently with exogenous ketones and goat yogurt. Seizure threshold remains high, and I'm able to do more exercise without an increase in seizure activity, which can happen if I do more glycolytic activity. Interesting. What do you think?
So kind of using ketones, yeah. So I guess in the context of doing intense glycolytic activity, that can change brain chemistry in a way that could trigger seizure if you're prone to seizure. So I think this would be very useful for people who are prone to seizures, exogenous ketones. That, many people are on a ketogenic diet as a metabolic therapy to manage their seizures, but I think exogenous ketones can further augment the therapeutic efficacy of the ketogenic diet by elevating ketones, but also attenuating the potential for glycemic fluctuations that could occur as a result of intense physical activity, or maybe even sneaking in some carbohydrates or a high protein meal. So I think what he's doing is a really smart thing to do. And I think I know Andrew's an experimenter, and he's finding out things that work for him.
Well, and he's going to med school, I think, at the University, the College of London or something like that, too, because his own brain tumor sparked him to not only seek out the ketogenic lifestyle, but now go to med school. Yeah.
He was a fantastic speaker at the Metabolic Health Summit, if you remember that. Yeah. So, yeah.
Great. So the only other thing I wanted to mention was the application. We've done shows about the application of exogenous ketones with migraine headaches. And this kind of fits into this discussion because migraine headaches were originally called hypoglycemic headaches because it was well understood that certain people who were very sensitive to hypoglycemia developed these aberrations in vision, the halo effects, tunnel vision, a sense of having to lay down and so on. And if you take exogenous, so most people know they're going to have a migraine. They feel something, they notice something, maybe they see a little blurriness in their vision, like, oh my God, I'm going to have a migraine. And we did a show with, I can't think of her name. She's a smart girl from Scandinavia.
Elena Gross?
Yes,
Elena Gross. Yeah. We wrote a review on this together. Yeah.
Yeah. We did a whole show about using exogenous ketones, that moment when you go, oh man, I'm going to have one. And it actually either shortens the episode or just stops it from happening. That's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating stuff. So
yeah, that occurs. I think that's beneficial for most people. So the brain goes into a migraine when it has experiences an energetic crisis, vasodilation or vasoconstriction, but also neuroinflammation. These are all things, and they're all interrelated. But I think the ketones effect on brain energy metabolism and maybe even altering the neuropharmacology of the brain. We know that ketones stimulate the production of certain neurotransmitters, through metabolism. Like that's, alpha ketoglutarate. That's how we make glutamate and GABA. So changing the neuropharmacology of the brain, lowering inflammation, preventing an energetic crisis, which could be, like you point out, hypoglycemia. So that could all be contributing. I think it's multifactorial.
I was fasted for 2 days. This was a few years ago. I was fasted for 2 days, and I had just finished training fasted. And I got into the sauna. And it was a day where I didn't have a show, so I sat in the sauna for like 40 minutes. When I stood up to walk out of the sauna, I felt like I was looking through a fish tank. Like everything out on the periphery out here was all wavy. And it was colorful, almost like a prismatic effect. And I thought, what the hell's going on? And I realized I was having what is actually known as an optical migraine. And I attributed it to a severe drop in blood sugar. And I sat down, and it took me about 10 to 15 minutes, and it went away. But when I felt it, I also felt very weak, very unstable. I thought, I'm hypoglycemic. Let me just sit down. But it went away. That's the only time it's ever happened. So when you say the brain is having an energetic crisis, that was what was happening on that day with me.
Could have been like hyponatremic or hypovolemic. So your plasma volume could have been down, and that could impair, brain blood flow and things like that. Your blood pressure, orthostatic hypertension is an example. People who fast or on a ketogenic diet, when they stand up, they get a little bit dizzy.
They get dizzy. Yeah. All right, look, Dom, thank you so much for dedicating so much time to this topic and coming on the show today. And hopefully people will learn to start experimenting with some different types of ketone, exogenous ketone products. I'm going to follow your direction. I'm going to start taking 8 grams right before a couple of my meals a day, and just see what the overall effects of that are over the course of a couple months, and we'll see. Very exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thanks for
having
being
me
here,
on,
brother.
Carl.
Yeah, of course.
Yep.
And one more time, let's plug your website. You don't have to wait for Dom to show up on someone's podcast. You can go to his website. It's ketonutrition.org. And he has everything you want to know about the ketogenic diet, ketone supplements, and everything else. Check it out. All right, Dom, take care. We'll see you soon, brother.
Thanks, Carl. Take care.
All right, and that's it for today. We do have a show tomorrow. I don't know what it is. If I paid more attention to my schedule, I would be able to tell you, but I'm sure it's going to be a good one. Please share this show. Always share the show. You not only help me, but you actually help other people who learn this stuff and maybe they never knew about it. Okay, see you tomorrow. Thanks for being here.